Welcome to Chapter 9. Probably one of the most challenging and fascinating periods in my career occurred when General Motors decided to emphasize going global. In my job, that meant commonizing business processes among Korea, China, Australia, Brazil, Germany, and North America. Believe me, I had no idea what I was in for. The cultural and ethical differences were staggering. In this chapter, we will discuss the challenges and ethical issues businesses face as they go global. The interesting thing about this quote is not so much what it says, but the date it was said. In 1940, before the Second World War, Wendell Willkie, Republican presidential nominee, was defeated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He said, "The world has become small and completely interdependent." The First World War made the U.S. painfully aware that it was part of a global community. By the end of World War II, this became abundantly clear. Business transactions in different countries, in different languages, and different cultures inevitably force North American companies to revisit ethical principles. This makes sense. You never really question your own ethical principles until you are confronted with something different. Any discussion of global business ethics must distinguish between less developed nations and developed nations. A less developed nation is a country that lacks economic, social, and technological infrastructure of a developed nation. Logically, then, a developed nation is a country that enjoys a high standard of living, as measured by economic, social, and technological criteria. They know how the game is played, and business is typically conducted in English, though that is projected to change in the future. These nations are busy pursuing maximum profits with minimum costs and often expect local cultures to adapt to their way of doing business. Page 176 of our text provides some amusing examples where that assumed adaptation just didn't work. From a business ethics perspective, the hunger for global growth at any cost presents some challenges. As you will recall from Chapter 1, utilitarianism would suggest that any questionable behavior in overseas markets can be explained away by serving the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But remember, this can lead to no accountability for individual actions. So how do you reconcile domestic ethical policies with expanding businesses overseas? To begin to figure this out, first we need to define globalization. Our text defines globalization as the expansion of international trade to a point where national markets have been overtaken by regional trading blocs, leading eventually to a global marketplace. As national markets become interdependent, questions arise over the ethical behavior of economically advanced nations towards developing ones. Operating in this increasingly globalized business world are multinational corporations that provide and sell products and services across multiple national boundaries. So here is a global ethics dilemma. What happens when you go beyond national boundaries? If ethical standards are based on cultural and social norms and customs, what happens when you are operating in an environment that is representative of multiple cultures and societies? For the less developed nations, the concept of globalization has a different meaning, according to Lester Thoreau. Among countries, the big losers are in Africa, south of the Sahara. They are not losing, however, because they are being crushed by globalization. They are losing because they are being ignored by globalization. They're not in the global economy. No one in the business community wants anything to do with countries where illiteracy is high, where modern infrastructure like telecommunications, reliable electric power does not exist, and where social chaos reigns. Such countries are neither potential markets nor potential production bases. In such environments, the black and white world of ethics gives way to the gray area of ethical relativism, in which your ethical principles are defined by the the traditions of your society, your personal opinions, and the circumstances of the present moment. Hopefully, you will remember some of this discussion from Chapter 1. If the practical reality in a local market is to grease the appropriate palms to get things done, it may be difficult for a company to stand by their principles of ethical conduct and still succeed in the local market. Supporters of the upside of globalization argue that globalization is bringing unprecedented improvements in wealth and standards of living to citizens in developing nations. Advocates of the downside of globalization argue that it is merely promoting the dark side of capitalism onto the global stage. Developing countries are ravaged for their raw materials with no concern for the long-term economic viability of their national economies. Workers are exploited, and corporations are free to take advantage of less restrictive legal environments. So what is the answer? A global code of conduct would be a general standard of business practice that could be applied to all countries over and above their local customs and social norms. But is the development of a global code of conduct realistic? For advocates of global ethics, a flexible solution has to be found, one that provides standards of practice to guide managers that also respects the individual customs of the countries in which they are operating. Richard DeGeorge offers the following guidelines. First, do no intentional harm. Second, produce more good than harm for the host country. Third, contribute to the host country's development. Fourth, respect the human rights of their employees. Fifth, respect the local culture, work with it, not against it. And sixth, pay their fair share of taxes. Don't manipulate the local government for unreasonable tax breaks. Cooperate with the local government to develop and enforce just background institutions. These could include schools, hospitals, and government services, to name just a few. Majority control of a firm includes the ethical responsibility of attending to the actions and failures of the firm. In other words, fix whatever you do wrong. Multinationals that build hazardous plants are obligated to ensure that the plants are safe and operated safely. And 10, multinationals are responsible for redesigning the transfer of hazardous technologies so that such technologies can be safely administered in host countries. Put safeguards in place so everyone can take advantage of technologies and remain safe. Now, these are guidelines and are at best ideal and overlook some of the most severe transgressions of multinational companies like bribery, pollution, false advertising, and abuse of human rights. While companies may be held accountable for ethical performance in their home countries, how can we enforce a global ethical standard? In 1999, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan launched the UN Global Compact, which became operational in July of 2000. This is a voluntary corporate citizenship initiative endorsing 10 key principles that focuses on 4 key areas of concern: the environment, anti-corruption, the welfare of workers around the world, and global human rights. The Global Compact is not a regulatory instrument. It does not police, enforce, or measure the behavior or actions of companies. Rather, the Global Compact relies on public accountability, transparency, and the enlightened self-interest of companies, labor, and civil society to initiate and share substantive action in pursuing the principles upon which the Global Compact is based. Over 2,000 companies make public commitments to a set of core values. Under human rights, businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. Businesses should make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. Under labor standards, businesses should uphold the freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining. Businesses should uphold the elimination of all forms of forced and compulsory labor. Businesses should uphold the effective abolition of child labor, and businesses should uphold the elimination of discrimination in employment and occupation. Under the environment, businesses should support a precautionary approach to environmental challenges. Businesses should undertake initiatives to promote greater environmental responsibility, and businesses should encourage the development and diffusion of environmentally friendly technologies. Finally, under anti-corruption, businesses should work against all forms of corruption, including extortion and bribery. The OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises were originally adopted as part of a larger Declaration on International Investments and Multinational Enterprises in 1976. The OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises represent a more governmental approach to the same issues featured in the UN's non-governmental Global Compact. Supporters argue that the government backing adds credibility to the issues being promoted, but the guidelines carry no criminal or civil enforcement. There are 10 chapters that draw on the same core values as the UN Compact across a broader series of issues. Chapter 1 is the introductory concepts and principles. It sets out the principles which underlie the guidelines, such as their voluntary character, their application worldwide, and the fact that they reflect good practice for all businesses. Chapter 2 covers general policies. These contain the first specific recommendations, including provisions on human rights, sustainable development, supply chain responsibility, and local capacity building, and calls on enterprises to take full account of established policies in the countries in which they operate. Chapter 3 covers disclosures. It recommends disclosures on all matters regarding the business. Chapter 4 covers employment and industrial relations. It addresses major aspects of corporate behavior in this area, including child and forced labor, non-discrimination, and the right to employee representation. Chapter 5 covers the environment. It encourages enterprises to raise their performance in protecting the environment, including performance with respect to health and safety impacts. Features of this chapter include recommendations concerning environmental management systems and the desirability of precaution when there are threats of serious damage to the environment. Chapter 6 talks about bribery, covers both public and private bribery, and addresses passive and active corruption. Chapter 7 covers consumer interests. This recommends that enterprises act in accordance with fair business, marketing, and advertising practices, respect consumer privacy, and take all reasonable steps to ensure the safety and quality of the goods and services provided. Chapter 8 covers science and technology. It aims to promote the diffusion of multinational enterprises of the fruits of research and development activities among the countries where they operate. Competition is covered in Chapter 9. This emphasizes the importance of an open and competitive business climate. And finally, Chapter 10 covers taxation. It calls on all businesses to respect both the letter and spirit of tax laws and to cooperate with tax authorities. In general, if an organization is committed to ethical conduct, that commitment should remain constant wherever the business is conducted. But the issue of global ethics is very complex, and sorting through the impacts of global interdependence will be challenging for years to come. You will have a chance to learn more about a very interesting company that attempts to demonstrate global citizenship when you read about Tom's Shoes, the assignment for this chapter. So that is Chapter 9. As always, if you have any questions, you can email me or post on our Questions, Issues, and Concerns discussion forum. I'll be back for our very last chapter, Chapter 10.